Dallas, I don't feel too well.
This is part 3 of Cats Not War. Part 3, a return to conspiracy and its theories. One, social disapproval. This is a technique by which the propagandist marshals group acceptance and suggests that attitudes or actions to the one outlined will result in social rejection, disapproval, or outright ostracism. Greenwald is, at this point, and whether he wishes to acknowledge it or not, a billionaire's investment. Why did one of the richest men in the world choose to invest in Greenwald? I think it's useful to consider very basic words: the mainstream, the establishment, insider, and outsider. Put simply, mainstream and establishment are those centers of power where ruling ideology is produced. Ideology are those thoughts, moods, ideas that the ruling class would like its subjects to adopt. In what body should the general public place its faith? What kind of things should it fear? What shall it consider strange and normal? What shall it find either attractive or repulsive? Who is the ruling class? This is simply another way of asking which people and organizations produce ideology. The answer depends on the social context one is navigating at a given moment. For society at large, it's the state, politicians and the police forces they marshal, the banks, those with the power to print money, and oligarchs. Media also, but those are owned by the state, banks, and oligarchs. Since the ruling class produces notions of desirability, it defines belonging, or at least the sense of belonging. This means that it also maintains methods for ostracizing. I see uses of some of the most common techniques for maintaining group cohesion and for humiliating dissenters using tried and true ad hominem attacks. These attacks include diagnoses of pathology, accusations of failure, a stated belief in individualized responsibility for that failure, and finally, the ultimate ostracization tool in the realm of political dispute, charges of conspiracy theory. Before I even delve into my first note, I want to make it known to you all that the author of this piece is Donnie Diggins, which sounds kinda close to Higgins. And now I'm really confused about this blog. Not only was I right about it potentially having multiple owners and authors, but all these names might be pseudonyms of the same person. I honestly think they're just screwing around with us now. But anyway, Donnie Diggins is the author of this article and the last one, part 2 of Cats Not War. Anyway, the author starts by describing to us what social disapproval is and how it can be used to subtly control masses of people by ostracizing, criticizing, and disapproving of their actions, ideologies, and thoughts if their targets step out of line. Greenwald is Omidyar's employee. Thus, he has a duty to the Intercept to act in accordance with its values set out by his boss. Ergo, of course he would make Ames, his rival and naysayer, out to look like a kook. There is an intrinsic value in presenting someone as uninformed or misguided. You seem much more rational and presentable by comparison, and by proxy, your arguments do too. If we combine all of Diggins' components for social disapproval and control, the establishment, mainstream, insider, and outsider, we get a mixture that paints an ominous picture. First, some quick one-line definitions. The establishment is the ruling or popular body of individuals or ideas that construct our material and social reality. What it says is in, and what isn't in is out. They control what is mainstream, or what is, in the popular cultural imagination, socially and morally acceptable. Likes, dislikes, fear, love, etc. Now, let's combine these two. The establishment, whomever they are, in this case it's Omidyar and his group of interested oligarchs, impels us to consider certain emotions, behaviors, values, etc. as acceptable, desirable, comfortable, normal, or what have you. They mainstream concepts. Unless you somehow shift the Overton window, which is the window that encapsulates acceptable discourse, then you'll keep the same concept mainstream, and outsiders, those who are conspiring, like Ames, will be turned into casual social pariahs. A journalist using their power of truth-telling can use underhanded tactics like questioning Ames's sanity and downplaying his concerns to make him seem like some Alex Jones fringe weirdo. Two. And this paragraph will start to speak about Jeremy Scahill, who is Greenwald's friend and an employee at First Look Media. Stop the War Coalition had invited Scahill to speak at a conference in Britain. It had invited a relatively obscure Syrian nun, Mother Agnes Mariam, to the same conference. Mother Agnes had lived in Syria for years and has cast much doubt on the narrative about Syria pumped out by Western establishment media. Scahill, along with left celebrity Owen Jones, threatened not to attend the conference if Mother Agnes appeared at the event as well. Here was a famous journalist threatening the very existence of an anti-war conference pertaining to a little understood and massively important topic, Syria, over some relatively unknown nun. Mother Agnes later said that she'd never heard of Scahill before the hoopla. A short game of chicken ensued and, naturally, the non-celebrity nun backed out of the conference, while Scahill arrived to applause and general fanfare. It was a slightly ridiculous sight, in that it had Scahill found disagreement with Mother Agnes. He could have used his platform at the conference to express that disagreement. Instead, he used his clout to bully her out of sight. This is a great example. This is one of those times where a talking head would normally say, well, face me in the marketplace of ideas, in some roundabout way, and then challenge their opponent to make them look stupid, as spectacle dictates this. But in Scahill's case, he was such a big-name journalist that he simply chose not to do anything except turn his back in a huff and wait for social pressure to get Mother Agnes to bow out. We can see this tactic used on social media. Have you taken up a position that's diametrically opposed to mine, and I simply cannot bear the thought of ever entertaining you because of XYZ? Well, fine, I'll use my own position and power to negate your own, and my in-group will follow me. Scahill's lack of professional integrity shows a lack of willingness for education and discussion. He could have used this time to make his own stance look better by default, but he just used his social capital and split. All this against an anti-war nun from Syria. Three. If tomorrow Scahill began to go on television and replace words and phrases such as unconstitutional and blowback, and as an American with imperialism and capitalism and the right to armed resistance, he would certainly become a likelier candidate for marginalization from the mainstream. Scahill's response to critics of his anti-nun power play, "My left-wing trolls and right-wing trolls should totally get together and have a little party in their parents' basement," he tweeted. As childish as Scahill's remark was, it tells us something about how the powerful see their adversaries. Their opponents are losers. If they were winners, or an approximation of that title, they could best them in public and become part of the mainstream in-group with a bunch of followers. Instead, however, they're weak and left nipping at the heels of the stronger with troll logic and arguments. It's just bad press to Scahill, nothing of substance to worry about. But what if the shoe was on the other foot? What if Scahill, like the writer imagined, was more honest? Would he face marginalization, or would he be co-opted by another power structure into their rhetoric? Would he single-handedly shift the discourse? Well, I'm not sure. Four, the ruling class continually works to cast every theory and critique of power as equally insane. It's not important how you have offended power, or for what reasons. Rather, what makes you offensive to respectable society, those with more power than you, is the fact that you've bothered to question it at all. So if any of you listen to Death Grips, I'm sure you've heard the song No Love off of No Love Deep Web. The chorus has a line, "You've got no business questioning a thing. You'll get to learn about the meaning of a beatdown, madness, chaos in the brain." Scahill considers the possibility that the class of people he belongs to are somehow unethical or wrong to be laughable. Why would you question power when all you have are complaints? This is the way it's always been. Until something radical changes it, trolls of all kinds will be seen as freaks. You've offended polite society by ringing an alarm bell, and everyone would just like to go back to their business as usual. Scahill, Greenwald, Wheeler, and Omidyar are bothered by the fact that someone is even asking them about how the way things are, instead of what they appear to be. They are, in essence, breaking the illusion. Five. Scahill's classic excursion into ad hominem pathology sent me to scan Greenwald's responses to his critics since his Omidyar deal came through. They're rather similar in nature. The main thrust of it pertains to how problematic it is that we're privy to only about 1% to 2% of the documents given to Greenwald by Edward Snowden. Greenwald used the words pathetic, moronic, anonymous, lazy, cowardly, idiot, and finally, almost as if performing a crescendo, announced, "I would probably throw myself off the nearest bridge if I heard myself saying something so dumb," about one of Tarzi's points, Tarzi being another one of his critics and another writer. And then there's Greenwald's conclusion. Sometimes we feel sorry and really bad about our own unwillingness to take risks and sacrifice our self-interest for some cause we claim to believe in. We get to feel a bit better about ourselves by attacking as inadequate those who actually are doing that. That's why so many journalists attacked WikiLeaks, because the actual adversarial reporting done by WikiLeaks made those journalists feel inadequate and afraid, so they lashed out. The criticism he received, Greenwald tells himself, have been made out of a jealousy of the fact that he, and presumably Snowden, have accomplished things his critics have not. He compared Floyd to a neoconservative circa 2003-2004, sending people off to war without a willingness to fight in them. He's injected into the conversation a mind-numbing credentialism. I can scarcely think of any reason to do this more useful than to expose his critics as mere peons. After all, how many members of the general public have leaked state secrets? Moreover, how many have even been in a position to? Thus, Greenwald has largely placed himself above reproach. The Centaurian speeches of the heir to Noam Chomsky about the public's right to know are thus at odds with a severe attitude towards members of that very public. Should they raise an objection, they become a collection of pathetic, lazy, anonymous, cowardly idiots who ought to be jumping off bridges rather than questioning the majesty of Greenwald's work and the uniqueness of his risks. Work undertaken, of course, for those pathetic, lazy, anonymous, cowardly idiots who ought to be jumping off bridges. I realize the highlights in this article are more spread out than the previous ones. Sorry about that. Nevertheless, Greenwald levels similar criticisms at his detractors, insulting their intelligence, sanity, and credibility. I would equate this to a higher level bullying. In reference to his journalistic endeavors being called into question by those below him, he becomes childish and goes for the age-old, "You're just jealous you didn't do XYZ," which is by far the stupidest insult in the book. His posturing boils down to securing himself as a successful, not everyone can do what I do, journalist. Greenwald compares another opponent of his to something he detests, a neocon warhawk who's a bona fide draft dodger himself. Another classic tactic. My enemies must be completely bad people, and I must insult every facet of their identity, no matter how minute, with accusations that stand opposed to my ideology. Six, he assumes the psychologist chair, offering up the psychologist's condescension with the use of the universal we, claiming that his critics' thoughts are but a manifestation of a broad, jealous rage against the world, and the fact that it won't let him have all the things attained by the almighty Greenwald. Left-wing politics are usually ascribed to pure envy. Observe how many critics of capitalism are described as left-wing loons. How many are said to be flat-out jealous? It constitutes the kind of ad hominems the ruling class loves. It works the same way any mental illness diagnosis tends to work. Take depression. Better to give sufferers the impression that something is simply and mystically wrong with them as individuals, that their problems lie outside of their social relations, that they cannot just be sensitive and perceptive persons. Pathologization is individualization. It keeps systemic critique outside the bounds of permissible thought. The danger, it seems, is that a lack of hard evidence can be scoffed at as conspiracy theory. This is what Wheeler herself did when she cued the scary music, and it's what Greenwald did when he reduced Ames's claims to the idea that Omidyar was changing the regime of Ukraine single-handedly. By the way, there's this really nice podcast, if you guys want to go check it out, called It's Not All in Your Head, and it's basically some professionals examining mental health through a lens of it's not just you, it's not all in your head. Society at large is to blame because there are many things outside of our control that dictate our material circumstances to not be so good. Just wanted to plug that. Anyway, for a little more plugging, I'm sure at least a few of you have seen ContraPoints' video essay on envy. Often, envy is attributed to those who levy a criticism at something. It's sour grapes on a pathological level. It's why anarchists are often thought of as kids rebelling against the system and the man, because they're immature and spoiled. Greenwald claims his critics are tapping into that very same wellspring. But what he fails to account for is that he's becoming the very thing he never wanted to become. Another conservative-adjacent talking head that presupposes to diagnose the entire world as crazies when they criticize the business of business. Now, you know my background is healthcare related, but even I must admit that there's a real big problem in healthcare when we tell people to deal with their woes in isolation without accounting for the material conditions of their wider social experiences that have brought them to a mental health crisis. Changing someone's material conditions will, in most cases, improve their psychological problems. Not all the way, but it'll be a huge step. And some practitioners know this, but it's too big a task for any one psychiatrist to contend with. It's easier to clean your room and be mindful than it is to start a union. Seven. It is first worth noting that the accusations of conspiracy theory fits right in with the general theme of pathology. The explanation for conspiracy theorists for a long time was that they were simply mentally ill. Psychology now favors a different explanation. Conspiracism arises from political cynicism, which is to say, extreme doubt in the veracity of claims made by society's ruling institutions. A project is underway from the ruling class to use it to describe those aware of the workings of capitalism, so that anti-capitalist analyses cannot be distinguished from theories about UFOs and lizard people and the like. The ruling class is essentially engaged in the same project when it labels skepticism of power conspiracism or conspiratorial. From the get-go, we can see that skeptics of capitalism are treated as conspiracy theorists if they don't have hard evidence, as if someone's just going to roll the curtain back and reveal all the secrets. It's not fun being lumped in with people who think Hillary Clinton drinks the blood of newborns to keep herself young. Nevertheless, pathologizing someone's doubts in our social institutions leaves a lot of room for dubious claims of mental disturbance to arise from anybody and everybody. The ruling oligarchs and plutocrats have mushed the two camps to keep everyone mad and atomized. Though of course, I assume the lizard people conspirators probably think we're the crazy ones. Eight. Conspiracist ideas are predicated by an alienation from mainstream politics and a questioning of received truths. What party could find such a prospect more terrifying than the ruling class? In one of the experiments that bolstered this conclusion, 1,200 registered voters were asked whether they believed in a certain set of theories. Among the theories was JFK stuff, a UFO had crashed into Roswell, and the CIA deliberately distributed crack cocaine throughout American cities. Remarkably, there's some truth in that final belief, as anyone familiar with the work of Gary Webb well knows. Driven by little more than an impulse to do his job correctly, as opposed to a drive to expose power, Webb published a series demonstrating that the CIA's counter-revolutionary clients in Nicaragua had been flying cocaine bricks into American cities. The CIA chose to look the other way, as the profits were helping to fund the Contra's military activities pursuant to the geopolitical aims of the United States. For his efforts, Webb was hounded out of journalism by major publications, which published pieces attempting to discredit him. By the time he was vindicated, it was too late. He'd long been dead with multiple bullet wounds in the head. The deceit in the method of the psychologists doing this research should not be missed. They subtly tossed in a half-true theory amongst theories backed only by highly disputed evidence or lacking credible evidence altogether. Gary Webb's whistleblowing ended very tragically, but I want to thank him for giving his life to expose the truth to light. Imagine if, instead of booting him out of journalism for being a supposed hack and a charlatan, Webb's colleagues felt a duty to their coworker and fellow industry man, and instead helped bolster him and his information up on a mass scale. Maybe, just maybe, he would have been alive today and more people would know of his plight. Dismissing people who engage in a search for truth like Webb as weirdos just alienates them more and makes them a bigger target for judgment and misinformation. Now, this is not to give credence to ideas with little substance behind them, but if, like Webb or even Karen Silkwood, a woman who lost her life because she dared to expose the truth in her workplace, these ideas seem like they lead to bigger things, it might be worth it to follow the thread so you can pull the ruling class's wool off from over the mainstream's eye. Nine. My argument was that the state could not exist without conspiracy, so the task of the critic of society is not to eschew conspiracy theories, but to improve it, making the best use of the available facts to reach reasonable conclusions. Conspiracy's ultimate aim is to achieve profits. In returning to Greenwald and Wheeler's request that claims about Omidyar's regime change efforts in Ukraine come with hard evidence, I'd like to make it clear that even if we lacked evidence about U.S. aid's aims in Ukraine, theorizing about the case would be entirely sensible. Any such theory would be arrived at by examining what Omidyar's business partner, USAID, has done elsewhere, such as Venezuela, for example, to reach a reasonable conclusion about what it might be doing in a place that shares some of Venezuela's key traits, such as Ukraine, which was, before regime change, nominally opposed to the United States and aligned more closely with Russia. In this case, conspiracy theory would constitute a use of inductive reasoning to reach necessary conclusions about the totalizing, or at least totalizing-ish, system known as global capitalism. Diggins states that a conspirator should not attempt to tell bold-faced claims about the truth, but rather gather all the evidence possible to gain credibility and then let the people come to their own conclusions. USAID, the NGO business affiliate Omidyar had allied himself with, is the conspiracy in question. It has, contrary to its mission, not promoted democracy and freedom for all people. The conspiracist's job would be to analyze its track record, notice patterns and trends, and then present the evidence to those who will listen in hopes of negating capital's monopolization over a conspiracy's usefulness, i.e., that it serves only to enrich the pockets of those who control mainstream discourse by making them look sane by comparison. However people might object to the use of inductive reasoning, they already use it in their everyday lives to protect themselves, and self-protection against capitalism is perhaps the ultimate and only necessary protection after all. Self-protection against capitalism explicitly occurs through assumptions made about classes and the social roles of these classes. Conflation of left-wing critique of power and right-wing critique makes it appear as if generalizations about class and generalizations about race are both problematic, when in fact the ruling class promotes the latter so as to prevent the former. The classic both sides of the same rhetoric is exactly why we need conspiracy theory in the first place. The ruling class knows that apolitical people, or people who cannot parse complex political discourse, see the world as being the definition of horseshoe theory, that every extreme wraps around to become the other extreme, even though power doesn't just wrap itself in circles like a Mobius strip. Therefore, it's easy to give generalizations and fake comparisons of two concepts and pretend that they're trying to say the same thing. Antifa are the real fascists, and they're the same as the neo-Nazis, is a great example. To someone who cares deeply about optics, probably on an impulse level, they just care about scary people throwing rocks at windows, Antifa looks just like skinheads with Nordic sun tattoos. They both yell, break things, and fight while chanting political slogans. Like the writer says, the ruling class would rather everyone shut up and take their medicine, so they agitate with race baiting instead of agitating with class baiting. And finally, 11. Let's consider some generalizations about various classes and even professions. America's more heavily policed populations no doubt learn quickly not to trust cops based on patterns of cop behavior. The retort, "not all cops are bad," is likely to remain a useless abstraction to a young African American male who is not in a position to gamble on that possibility. Of course, this leaves aside the exact social role of a cop, which is to carry the guns of the state to protect private property. Likewise, people learn quickly to examine closely the paychecks they receive from their bosses to make sure they receive everything they're owed. The retort, "not all bosses are bad," is an abstraction likely to change the behavior of somebody who needs the money they're owed to eat and to live. Again, this leaves aside the exact social role of the boss, which is to exploit employees to achieve maximum surplus value. If U.S. aid is up to something in a country on the receiving end of the U.S. empire's thrashes, we need not wiretap the billionaires co-funding it to know he's up to something rotten. A billionaire's role is to make more money to continue being a billionaire. Omidyar's move, if he wants to maintain his home, his car, his bank account, etc., is to fulfill his social role and collaborate with US aid to squeeze money out of Ukraine during unstable times. Billionaires, like cops and bosses, constantly need to absolve themselves from the perceptions their victims hold of them. And that's all. Thank you for watching, and this concludes Cats Not War, Parts 1, 2, and 3. I'll see you next time for the next article. Bye!
Three, 8, 2, 7, 7.